let's regroup, be a good audience, learn something new from Miranda. Whenever you're ready. Okay. I would like you all to take a moment to picture your dream home. Think about what it looks like. Where is it located? Who lives there with you or near you? What sort of objects fill your home? And what sort of legacy do you hope to create there? And lastly, I want you to think about how big your home is. Is it a sprawling McMansion with dozens of rooms? Or is it more of a standard size 2,000 square foot home? Now I want you to take that dream home and condense it down to only 500 square feet of living space. Could you do it? Would you even do it? Would it still be your dream home? The fact of the matter is that many people are choosing to reject the traditional standards of how big a house should be and are choosing to live in tiny houses, many of which are much smaller than 500 square feet. Tiny houses offer a smaller alternative for people who want to own their own home, but for whatever reason can't obtain a traditional size house. So today I would like to talk to you about the rise in popularity of tiny houses, the benefits of living in tiny houses, and then finally I'll look at a slideshow of some examples of tiny houses. So tiny houses are nothing new. They've been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's really only been recent times that houses have gotten as big as they are today. The National Association of Home Builders says that the average house today is about 2,500 square feet. But back in 1950, the average newly built home was only 983 square feet. And the average size family was much bigger back then. So I guess the American dream has just grown over the last few decades. But in 2008, the housing market crashed and the following recession caused a lot of people to lose their homes. They had to move into apartments, living in spaces that were much smaller than what they had grown accustomed. And there were many people that chose to push the envelope to see just how small of a space they could live with and still call it a home. This was the birth of the modern tiny house movement. Nowadays, you'll see lots of TV shows, reality TV shows about tiny houses, such as the Tiny House Nation, Tiny House Big Living, and Tiny House Hunters. Also, social media websites such as Pinterest and Instagram have really helped to promote the spreading interest of tiny houses. How many of you have actually seen tiny houses come across your social media feed? Anybody? Yeah, see, they're growing in popularity. Now that we've talked a little bit about the growing popularity of tiny houses, let's talk about some of the benefits of living in a tiny space. One of the obvious benefits is cost. Because you're living in a smaller space, it costs a lot less to heat and cool your house. And it's also a lot less expensive to maintain it. And the initial building cost is also a lot cheaper. The Tiny Life, which is a popular tiny house blog, says that the average standard house costs about $272,000 to build, whereas the average tiny house costs only $23,000 for the owner that builds it themselves. If you're not able to build your own home, there are many tiny house manufacturers out there that can build it for you. Tumbleweed Tiny House Company is a very popular tiny house manufacturer, and their houses can be built for only $63,000, which is still much better than a standard size house today. Tiny houses are also much more sustainable because they use less resources to build in the first place and less resources to maintain. It's also very easy to implement alternative energy sources in tiny houses, such as solar and wind. You can also outfit them with low water use fixtures, and many tiny houses have composting toilets, which is a much more sustainable way of dealing with human waste. But that's a topic for another day. Tiny houses also are great at facilitating community. Brandon Irwin is a researcher with Kansas State University, and he is studying the health benefits of living in tiny houses. This is what he has to say. Some individuals live in tiny houses on their own in the country, but there are others who live in tiny house villages. We think that does a few things for one's health, including creating a better sense of community, satisfying people's basic needs for relationships, offering affordable housing options, and encouraging physical activity through community gardens and walking to urban establishments. Tiny houses also offer freedom and mobility because many of them are built on flat trailer beds, so people can actually pull them with their vehicles and move to new areas. So that gives people the option of building their home before they've actually decided where they want to live long term. And the final benefit I'd like to talk about is the fact that with less space, you accumulate less stuff. Some people see this as a downside because they don't get to have as much stuff as they'd like to have, but for other people it is in fact a benefit if they're trying to simplify their lives and declutter. It forces you to keep with you only the things that you need and love. I recommend 2 books to helping people simplify their life and reduce their stuff to the things they truly love. Marie Kondo has 2 books, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up and the companion book Spark Joy. And her books really help encourage you to look at the things in your life and choose only the objects to keep that truly spark joy and make you happy. All right, now that we have looked at some of the benefits of living in tiny house, let's look at some of the different kinds of tiny homes. Got some examples here. Okay, so all of the photos on here come from tinyhouseswoon.com, which is one of my favorite resources for photos of tiny houses. This is probably one that people are very familiar with. It's just a log cabin. Many of you may have even stayed in a log cabin before. I know I certainly have. But some people choose to live in these full time. This is a cob-style home, which is actually made of earthen materials. Great thing about these is that you can often harvest materials from your own property to build these homes. They're extremely energy efficient. They hold in the heat during the winter and keep cool during the summer. This is a Geodesic Dome, which were very popular back in the 60s and 70s. They're not as common now, but you can still find them. This is a yurt, which is inspired by the traditional Tibetan homes. And they are semi-mobile. They usually are set up on a temporary foundation, but if you wanted to, you actually can move these, though sometimes people make them to be much more permanent. This is more of a traditional park model type trailer home, but nowadays they're being made more and more with quality materials. They're less associated with lower income families anymore. You can get really nice luxury models. This is a shipping container home, which I absolutely love these because they recycle shipping containers and turn them into nice stylish little homes. This is a houseboat, which is an unconventional form of tiny house, but if you like living on the water, it's great because it is mobile. You just have to stay on the water, and they're pretty fun. This is one of the more popular models of tiny homes these days. Is built on a trailer bed, like I was mentioning earlier, and they can be quite stylish and roomy despite the limited space. This here is a converted bus. It looks just like a bus, but on the inside it is quite beautiful, and these are actually becoming very popular. And finally, here is a Airstream trailer, which are pretty classy and retro, but people are also choosing to live in these full time. And then there's always the option of living in an RV, which is pretty much already like a home. And this one here is actually my own RV. I recently bought it. It's a 1991 Class C motorhome. And it's certainly not something you would see on Pinterest, at least not yet. It is being renovated. The decor is obviously of the mid-90s. But it is going to be my home, and it's going to be me and my dog when come fall time. And it's giving me a lot of freedom to be able to move where I want to go, and also help me financially as I'm going through college. But yeah, tiny houses are definitely not for everybody. But for those that value mobility and living, choosing where they want to live over how much stuff they have or how big their house is, tiny houses offer a great alternative. Yeah, thank you.